With that being said, we're going to go ahead and begin today's webinar. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining today's grant solicitation webinar, the OJJDP Fiscal Year 2020 Strategies to Support Children Exposed to Violence. My name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And before we begin today's webinar, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. Our YouTube page is where we archive our webinars. Please take a moment to view our page where you can find other webinars that are associated with juvenile justice-related topics. For supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at OJJDP-TTA@USDOJ.gov. For those wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar, including the PowerPoint and an FAQ for webinar participants, please locate the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Again, here you will find the webinar PowerPoint and an FAQ, frequently asked question document, for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions that you may have. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a question and answer session where the presenter will address some of the questions that have been both posed during the presentation and that were submitted previously before today's webinar. If you do have a question for our presenter, please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. Now, to help us get a count, and I know that many of you are more than likely joining in a secure location, but if at any chance there may be more than one individual that is joined or you all have joined in a group, please take a minute to help us count. If you're viewing by yourself, which I'm sure most of you are, again, there's no need to type anything at this time, but if you're viewing in a group, please go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. And I'll repeat that in again because I see that my sound may sound a little choppy here, so I'll repeat that for everyone. For those of you participating in today's webinar in a group, please take a minute to help us count. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time, but if you're viewing in a group, meaning that you have multiple people there with you, go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. I also want to take this time to inform the audience that we do see now that we tend to have high frequency or high usage, for our webinars. So if at any time you're experiencing any technical difficulties with Adobe Connect, please be patient. We can help to assist you with any technical issues that you're having. If at any time that we lose sound, please be patient. We will indeed address any type of loss in sound as well during the webinar. But just please be patient with us. If we encounter any type of technical difficulties, we will move the presentation along. Thank you for your patience. Thank you in advance for your patience. So that being said, I will now turn today's webinar over to our moderator and presenter, Ms. Cindy Pappas, for today's presentation. Cindy, take it away.
Great. Thank you, William. Again, my name is Cindy Pappas. I am a Senior Policy Advisor with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the Special Victims and Violent Offenders Division, and I will be managing this program, which you should all be here for. It is the OJJDP FY 2020, Strategies to Support Children Exposed to Violence. But before I begin, I can't begin any conversation without acknowledging kind of where we are in our new world, in our new normal, and I want to extend my gratitude to each of you for joining today. I see our number of our attendees. We have over 300 right now, for you to take your time out of your schedules and in dealing, I know many of us are juggling work and family and emotions and a lot right now, a whole lot. And for you to choose to show up and spend this time, this hour with us today, it really shows your dedication to your communities, to combating victimization, to children who are our most vulnerable and will continue to be so, maybe even more so in this environment, and your efforts in reducing violent crime in your communities. So before I begin and jump into the grant side of the house, I thank you deeply for the work that you do, and I pray that you and your families are all safe and healthy and remembering the importance of self-care. I'm looking at the names, I'm seeing where you're coming in as well. I'm sorry, I'm also seeing that I need to speak up a little bit. My apologies. But I see the agencies that you're calling in from and the work that you do. Very often you are the very last people to take time for self-care. So I implore you to do that, particularly in uncertain times. It's kind of the oxygen mask first, to go back to a flight attendant conversation we had earlier. It's really important. Take care of yourself, and then we'll be able to do this work going forward. So with that, I will get back to our regularly scheduled program, and I will start with a little bit of information about our office. So the office, you'll see the alphabet soup up there. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention is a component of the Office of Justice programs within the U.S. Department of Justice. So I promise there won't be a quiz. That's a lot. But OJJDP is a component of DOJ. And OJP, this is the program side of the house, includes the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, National Institute of Justice, Office for Victims of Crime, and I'm going to take a deep breath for this one, the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, also known as the SMART Office. And at OJJDP, we envision a nation, this is what's true and near to dear, I think, to many of our hearts, but where our children are free from crime and violence. And if they come into contact with the justice system, that contact should be both just and beneficial to them. You'll see the two components to our name. It's juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. By supporting states, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in your efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles, our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families. And you'll see that many of our grant opportunities, that is what we are asking you all to keep in mind as you're writing these solicitations, to be consistent with the mission. During today's webinar, I will provide a general overview of the OJJDP FY 2020 strategies to support children exposed to violence. I'm going to briefly review the solicitation requirements, and I'll highlight the resources and tools available to help you in your application process. There will be time for a few questions at the end of the presentation today. William and I have gone through and reviewed many of the ones that have been submitted in advance, and I thank you for that. That really does help us get a sense of who's calling in and what your questions are. But please note, we are now at 340, 42, 43, so we're well over 340 attendees today. So it's not likely I will get to all of your questions. I'll answer as many as we can, particularly the ones that we received in advance and as they're coming in now. But I want you to know, after this, you have full access to our response center. William put that number and email up in the beginning. I will close my presentation with that at the end, and they answer all of your questions. If there are programmatic questions, they reach out to me directly, so I help them triage the questions and get responses back to you. They really, really are fabulous. So this is not your one stop to ask questions, so please do know that. Here is a link to the solicitation. If you haven't downloaded it, I'd advise you to do that. I'll be walking through it, particularly those that, if this is your first time submitting a federal application, I'm really glad that you're here with a lot of time because it can feel really heavy. I mean, it is a lot to address, a lot to answer, and that's why we do these webinars. And I'm, again, glad you're here well in advance in looking through what this solicitation will be asking you specifically for. The number one thing in advance is looking at that deadline. That deadline still is, and this is one of the questions that we received in advance. Will the situation with COVID-19 impact the closing date of this solicitation? The answer to that is not at this time. At this time, it is still closing on April 27th, 2020. And we really, really encourage applicants to submit your applications 72 hours prior to the due date. This will allow you to, if there's any technical issues in submitting it or any issues that need to be addressed when you do, that you have time. So we ask that you not wait till the 11th hour. And William, just make sure I'm getting a couple notices that you can hear me okay. Please let me know if you cannot.
Yes, we can hear you okay. And well, for those of you who have logged in, I put the message or a note in the chat. What you can do is please log out quickly and then log right back in, and that should resolve any audio issues that you may encounter. Put this note or message in the chat, but just letting anyone know that if you are hearing any breaking up or in and out, log out really quickly of Adobe and come right back in, and you'll be able to resolve that. Also note that we do have closed caption at the very bottom, right below our PowerPoint, that will allow you to follow along. And also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be later at a later date. So hopefully with those contingency plans here, we can help to resolve that, Cindy. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, I will speak clear if the issue's on my end, but please keep me posted. All right, so we noted the end date, or I'm sorry, the application date, April 27th. Circle that on your calendars, but do please try to submit 72 hours in advance to address any issues that might occur. This is an open and competitive solicitation. As I'm seeing the numbers still rise of our attendees, it is one that is dire need and of interest in our field. So this will be competitive. And eligible applicants are limited to states. And I say limited, it's quite open. Limited to states, including territories, units of local government, federally recognized Indian tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and institutions of higher education. So it's important to note that the applicant must be the entity that would have primary responsibility for carrying out the award. We encourage partnerships, but there should be one entity who is going to be taking responsibility for all administration and financial management of the program. And this question came in earlier when you all were registering. So one of the questions is, what is the age? And the age in which all of OJJDP's funding applies is to services to youth who are under the age of 18. So should not include youth who are 18 or older. So what does that mean if you are providing direct services to a youth who is 16 or 17 and then turns 18 and you're still providing direct services? Absolutely, they would stay in the program in which this federal funding was being used for. It just cannot be targeted to those youth 18 and older. So I hope that answers that specific question that we received. We are seeking proposals from applicant agencies to, 1, reduce the incidence of violence through accountability efforts for juvenile offenders. 2, respond to victimization of children, whether as a result of violence that occurs in school, family, or community. And to increase protective factors to prevent juvenile violence, delinquency, and victimization. So children exposed to violence that can be direct victims or witnesses to violence in their homes, schools, and communities. And the objectives of this, you should propose programs in your local communities that meet the following objectives. And these are important. So I'm going to read, I apologize, I don't like to read directly from the slides, but they're important and I want you to acknowledge them and answer them as you are developing your solicitations. These are also, your applications to the solicitation. And this is pulled directly from the solicitation. So the objectives of this funding of this program is to enhance and or develop and implement supportive services for children exposed to violence in their homes, schools, and communities. And as I mentioned previously, children's exposure to violence is defined as witnessing or direct victimization. Second objective is to develop community-based approaches and crime reduction strategies that focus on prevention and intervention of violent crime and accountability for youth offenders. We are looking for an accountability focus as well. To provide outreach strategies to increase awareness and build the capacity of families and communities to help children who have been exposed to violence. You are required to propose and undertake your work through a multidisciplinary team of stakeholders. Now, this can be an existing collaborative group or one that is formed specifically for this project. And a description of the team structure must be referenced in the program narrative and can be submitted as an attachment labeled planning team. I'll reiterate that. So it's important that you are working with a multidisciplinary team on these issues, whatever that makes sense to your local problem, to your local issues that you are trying to solve with this funding, but it takes multiple stakeholders. And please reference that in your program narrative and then include as an attachment, save this planning team with the names of all those who are part of that multidisciplinary team effort. And yes, all objectives should be addressed in your solicitation. So we expect to make up to 7 awards of $1 million each for a 3-year project period, starting October 1st. And we received a lot of questions, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes on this here. It's important to note when you're submitting your budget, when you're thinking about how you are going to structure your program proposal, it is $1 million across 3 years. So the total amount of your request should not be more than $1 million, up to $1 million across the 3 years. It's not $1 million per year for 3 years. And the budget should be for a 3-year time frame. You do not have to equally spend the money or budget the money for those 3 years. If you think that your program might need more money up front or more in implementation in the middle, it does not have to be equally divided across those 3 years, but it does need to be spread out logically across those 3 years and not to go more than $1 million. We are making 7 awards, up to 7 awards, so our total amount of funding for this is $7 million. So I hope that answers. We received many questions in advance about the budget, so I hope that does clarify. I will address this. I'm seeing a couple questions pop up. Letters of commitment or MOUs from the multidisciplinary teams, not required. If you have them, fantastic. We know sometimes it's difficult to get letter MOUs developed, and really do be thoughtful at your stakeholder group. Not bringing people to the table. Make sure that you're thoughtful in what the problem is and the proper stakeholders are there. But if they would include letters of support, that would be great. Or if you have a standing memorandum of understanding, that would be even better, but not a requirement. Per the solicitation, we are just asking that you list your team. I hope that clarified that question. So here's some additional resources that we have, and this is going to help address, I cannot get into specifics on what programs you should be doing or shouldn't be doing because you are dealing with your own individual issues and problems. And this is a broad category. Children's exposure to violence in homes, schools, and communities is very broad, so we are asking you to tell us what the problem is, what the issues are, what have you done to address it, and then we are hopeful to fill in the gaps that are missing. The resources that I have here provides an overview across all of our criminal and juvenile justice issues of evidence-based practices that you might want to consider if you haven't. So OJJDP's Model Program Guide, this contains information about evidence-based juvenile justice and youth prevention, intervention, and reentry programs. If you're not familiar with these, please do use them, whether for this solicitation or not. There's some tremendous resources that are available through our Model Program Guide, and share it with your stakeholders. There's so much. It's a resource for practitioners and communities about what works, what's promising, and what's importantly, what does not work. I think we want to learn that before we learn that ourselves in juvenile justice, delinquency prevention, and child protection and safety. OJP's crimesolutions.gov, this is another tremendous resource that uses rigorous research to inform practitioners and policymakers about what works in criminal justice, juvenile justice, and crime victim services. This is not focused on youth violence prevention intervention. This is our OJP, so it's a broad adult, youth, juvenile, and criminal issues. The research on evidence-based practices, again, if you're not familiar with crimesolutions.gov, I advise you to use that. And then what works? This would be specifically for school-based, and I see quite a few school-based partners. If you're looking to do a school-based violence prevention program, this clearinghouse reviews the existing research on different programs, products, and practices, and policies in education in helping you make some evidence-based decisions. So I hope those resources are useful. Again, even not necessarily targeted to this solicitation, just in the work I know that you all are doing, there's some tremendous resources within these three. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of the requirements, gone a little bit through the solicitation, and kind of the background on what we're looking for, I'm going to dive into the process. And it can feel a little bit heavy. If this is your first time, it can look overwhelming. And if you're doing it last minute, it would be very overwhelming, but you're not. You're here now, so that's what's great about this. You're on this call and you're taking the time to review and digest everything that you're going to need to do to submit a comprehensive, fabulous application for us to be really conflicted on who to choose. So let me dive into everything that is required, and there it is. We can all take a collective breath because it's a lot. And I'm going to go through each one briefly. I will also note that in the solicitation is the links to the Grant Application Resource Guide. So OJP's Grant Application Resource Guide serves as a vital tool as you're filling this out, as you're developing your proposals. There are links throughout the entire solicitation to give you guidance in specific areas, but then the resource guide gives the general overview of everything that you are going to need. So again, it's linked within the solicitation, and hopefully it won't be too difficult once we go through an understanding of everything that you'll be required to submit. So the SF 424, this is a required standard form. This is a cover sheet for submission of all pre-applications in OJP. It's completed through Grants.gov, and again, it's basic. It is your information, your title, the title of your project, and the amount of funding requested. But we do use that, so that's an important standard form for you to fill out, and that'd be the very beginning of your application process. The project abstract, this should be a brief 400 words or less. Think of this as your elevator speech that describes your project's purpose, the population that you'll be serving, the activities that you'll be implementing to achieve your goals and objectives. So this is what would be public-facing if you are awarded. If you've ever gone into our past funding on our website and looked at previously funded awards, this is the paragraph that typically shows up. It should be included as a separate attachment. There is a template within there, so there was a question, and I appreciate that. I see that is a bit confusing. It's a template that's there to fill out and should be included when you submit your application. So when you fill it out, it will put it into the single-spaced 12-point font with 1-inch margin. So this will not be counted against your program narrative, which has very specific page limitations, and that will be an attachment. And that's something that will not be generated where you fill in. That'll be an attachment that you develop, and I'm going to get into a lot of detail on the program narrative now. Again, this is really competitive. We're still well over 300 applicants. We have, or not applicants, 300 attendees with we're making 7 awards. So I'm asking, why are we so structured on page limits? And that's the why, to keep the review uniform for us. So please submit a program narrative that is detailed. Detail your purpose, the goals, the objective, the strategies, the design and management of your proposed program. This is what needs to be double-spaced, 1-inch margins, not exceeding 30 pages, in a standard 12-point font, preferably Times New Roman. Again, you can include references, and we actually ask that you do submit references as you're going through data. That does not count against the page requirement. The program abstract does not count against the program 30-page limit. And if the program narrative fails to comply with these length restrictions, we may consider such non-compliance. I feel like such a harsh word, but we may consider such non-compliance in the peer review and final award decisions. Again, this is going to be a very competitive year for this funding. The description of the issue should briefly describe the nature and scope of the problem that you propose to address. Please use data that provides evidence that this problem exists. Demonstrate the size and scope of the problem and document the effects of the problem on the target population and the larger community. If you're using data or research, please make sure that you cite your sources and any evaluation or research studies that relate to the problem and contribute to your understanding of its causes and potential solutions. This is where you would indicate what you have done to address this, what you are doing, what gaps we can help you fulfill or fill with this funding. Detail how the project will operate throughout the funding period and describe the strategies that you will use to achieve the goals and objectives. And if you remember, and then when you go back into the solicitation and looking at what are the goals and objectives that you have identified and do they align with the solicitation? We do not require a funding match, but if you plan to include any resources, whether cash or in kind, to support this project, detail them here and discuss a plan of sustainability beyond the grant period. We do very much like to see that you see whatever you're proposing sustaining after federal funding is no longer available. And what are your plans for that? So capabilities and competencies should describe the experiences and capability of your organization and any contractors, or if you plan to subgrant any awards to subgrantees that you plan to implement and manage this effort. You should highlight any previous experience implementing projects similar of design or magnitude. Describe the roles and responsibilities of program staff and explain the program's organizational structure and operations. If you could please include a copy of your organizational chart. So this would be a separate attachment saved as organizational chart and uploaded. This does not count against your 30-page limit unless you include it in the program narrative. So it's best to reference it and then include it as an attachment. Please also include who will be managing the finances, how the organization manages subawards if you plan to make subawards, and the management of the proposed project for funding. So again, this should be the applicant entity who is responsible for overseeing all of that. So the plan for collecting performance measures should detail how you will gather the required data. And I actually detailed this. I'm going to skip on to the next slide, which has more information. We'll need you to demonstrate your understanding of the performance data reporting requirements. There's a link here. There's a link in the solicitation and how you'll gather this data. So it's important that you do not need to submit any performance measures that are required once you receive funding. Just how will you plan? You have to get in there, take a look at the performance measures as it relates to this program, and just provide a brief explanation of how you would plan to address that which will be required through the performance measure page. So that information is on our performance measurements page, which is up on the screen, again, linked in the solicitation. We ask that all applicants use the Excel version of OJP's budget detail worksheet, which is also linked in the application when completing your budget, when submitting your budget. Please include a thorough and detailed, clear description of every cost in the narrative section. So when you open up the budget detail worksheet, there will be a place for you to put in your amounts, and then under each in the narrative section to detail clearer description of what those costs will be used for. It must be complete, cost-effective, and allowable. There's links to the DOJ Financial Resource Guide that explains what all that is, what we will fund, what we will not, and what you'd have to work with your program manager for additional questions. So we're looking for reasonable, allocable, and necessary for project activities. And we would like to see a brief narrative on how you will maximize cost effectiveness of grant expenditures. There's a question as I'm here right now of what performance outcomes are highest priority. There are none ranked higher. And you'll see in there, and your programs may not address all of the performance measures which we're asking for, because you are also varied in what you are doing. And again, children's exposure to violence is a broad topic. So we're not expecting you to make up anything to address performance measures, but what of the performance measures for this solicitation are most relevant to the work that you're doing. That's all we're looking for. We're not ranking them by any means. I'm going to go through this section fairly quickly. Again, there's a lot of links in there. Much of it's self-explanatory, and this alone could be a full-day seminar. But as it relates to you, not all of the additional information is applicable, but I'll go through each of them. The indirect cost rate agreement, if you are seeking indirect costs, you must have a current, which means unexpired, federally approved indirect cost rate, and to apply attached of your indirect cost rate agreement to the application. For those of you that have that, you know what that is. A tribal authorizing resolution, a tribe, tribal organization, or third party that proposes to provide direct services or assistance to residents on tribal lands must include in its application a resolution, letter, affidavit, or other documentation as appropriate that demonstrates that you have the requisite authorization from the tribe or tribes to implement the proposed project on tribal lands. The Financial Management and System of Internal Controls questionnaire, this is required for all applicants, and that's self-explanatory. There's a link to it within the application. Everyone, again, must submit that as part of your application. Everyone must also submit the disclosure of lobbying activities. So you must complete and submit this even if you are not expending any funds for lobbying activities, when you open this, when you fill out this form, just enter not applicable or NA in the text box for item 10. Just NA and then still submit the disclosure of lobbying activities. We need to make sure that we have that as part of the application, even if you are not expending any funds for lobbying activities. And that form is pretty much self-explanatory for those that do plan. Applicant disclosure of pending applications. This is really important. We need to look across all of our federal sister agencies to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, that we're not subplanning any funding. So please do make sure that you disclose whether you have or you are proposed as a subrecipient under any pending application for federal funded grants or cooperative agreements that, one, includes requests for funding to support the same project being proposed in the application under this solicitation, or two, would cover any identical cost items outlined in the budget submitted to OJP as part of the application under this solicitation. I feel like that was a lot of information, so I'm going to do that one again. So your disclosure of pending applications, if you are applying for any other federal grant, it may be best to disclose that. Think if it does relate specifically to what you're seeking funding for through this solicitation, but it may be best to save any concerns later to disclose any of your applications that you're going in for FY 2020 now, and also if you are proposed as a subrecipient for other, my apologies, my phone is beeping. Can you still hear me, William?
Yeah, I can still hear you loud and clear on my end. Yes.
Okay, fabulous. Might just be my children's school saying there's no more school. Wouldn't that be a surprise today? Anyhow, I digress. So moving on, next to DOJ high-risk grantee. If you are designated as a DOJ high-risk grantee, you would know who you are, and it's important to submit as a separate attachment to your application that we'll use, among other pertinent information, to determine if we'll consider or select your application for an award under this solicitation. So that's all DOJ high-risk grantees to submit notification and such. This is not a research project, but if you are proposing research, including research and development or evaluation, you must demonstrate that any funding used for research and evaluation, that you can demonstrate independence and integrity, including appropriate safeguards, before you would receive award funding. Last but not least, disclosure of executive compensation. Now, this is specifically for nonprofit organizations. You're required to make disclosures relating to the processes that you use to determine the compensation of your officers, directors, trustees, and key employees. If you're a nonprofit, there is a link that takes you to the website that fully describes what this is. And once you read it, you'll have a better understanding if it pertains to you, if you do need to disclose executive compensation. So look at that link closely and determine if it makes sense for you to make that disclosure. Again, for additional information on all these requirements, again, I know it's a lot. This is a tremendous amount of information. I hope you're all still with me and doing some deep breathing. All of these are in the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide. There are links throughout the entire solicitation. Our response center is standing by for questions you have as you're going through this. So you're not alone. There's a lot of things we can't answer as far as what specifically you should apply for, but we can help you through the process in getting your information to us. We do have a couple priority areas that have been lifted up over the past year or so. We will give priority consideration, and that means that these awards, that if you are any of these three, they'll be lifted up that address specific challenges in rural communities. So if Each applicant proposing to receive priority consideration under the rural priority, you will need to provide a sufficient narrative to include what makes the geographic service area rural, so using the U.S. Census or other appropriate government data, how isolated the area is from needed services, and how you will address those specific challenges in rural communities. So those are our rural community priority considerations. Secondly, consideration under high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties priority should provide a sufficient narrative explaining and how you identify your high poverty area. Again, this should be by census tract number or each specific persistent poverty county where individuals are intended to benefit from the requested grant, and how this funding will be used to address your challenges in each identified area. So again, that would be, the onus would be on you to describe and define whether in the rural or in the high poverty area, how you and your community would meet those definitions. And then the last one, to receive priority consideration under the qualified opportunity zone, to provide a sufficient narrative explaining to clearly identify the public safety benefit the applicant anticipates that its project will have on a specified opportunity zone. And this, I think this just came either last year was, I certainly remember the first time I think we put it into our solicitations, and there's a link to within the solicitation that shows exactly those areas that are affected, and we call them QOZs because QOZs is Qualified Opportunity Zone. So if you are within any of those areas, by consensus tract number, include yourself as such, and then include as an attachment all of the census tracts that are labeled and how you will be addressing them. So much more information in the solicitation. I just wanted to bring those 3 priority areas to your attention. If you think that you fall in any of those 3, please do write a narrative that addresses as such. To register, you must do so with Grants.gov prior to submitting an application. Again, note that date and time, April 27th, 2020, no later than 11:59. To be considered timely, it must be submitted by that deadline using Grants.gov. And once you submit, you'll receive a validation message from Grants.gov that indicates that you have submitted. And that's why we really do say 72 hours in advance. Make sure that you get that validation message from Grants.gov. If there's any hiccups, you do want to give yourself a little bit of a buffer to fix it. We also encourage you to sign up for Grants.gov email notifications regarding this solicitation. So if it's modified, that could happen in the era, what's happening in our world right now. This solicitation could be modified, timelines could be modified, so please do sign up for Grants.gov. If the solicitation is modified, those who sign up will automatically be notified. Otherwise, do still look into our onto our OJJDP website. As I said, you are not alone, ever, but you're certainly not alone in developing this solicitation. If you have questions or concerns with the what, information on the forms that I talked about, questions that I won't be able to answer, as I'm seeing I'm already down to 15 minutes, the Response Center is here Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the solicitation close date, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on other dates. So use them. They are fabulous. They are absolutely fabulous. And then if there are any questions or concerns with technological issues, if you need technical assistance, Grants.gov, their hotline is here as well, and they are 24/7. If you're super excited and you want to get on Grants.gov tonight at 3 o'clock in the morning, I haven't tested this. So yes, they are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except federal holidays. So as you're going through, if there are issues, reach out to them. They are all fabulous to work with and to assist your efforts. So that was a tremendous amount of information. We're going to jump into our Q&A, and I know William has a couple questions for me, so I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you, William.
Yes. Thank you, Cindy. Before we begin our questions, I do want to just address to the audience, we did receive you all's feedback. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will provide it at a later date. Please note that because of some people mentioning they had some interference with audio due to high usage, that we will expedite the publishing of the webinar, and we'll get that done quickly. So just wanted to make that quick announcement, Cindy, just to let folks know. So let's go into our first question that we have here. So again, Cindy, we did get a lot of questions, as you indicated, from registrants about specific program implementation strategies. For example, evidence-based models to address violence in communities, recommended home visitor and school-based programs, trauma screening tools, and requests for domestic violence resources. And just wanted to open up our Q&A portion by giving you an opportunity to address some of those questions, please.
Thank you, William, and I appreciate that. And we did go through a lot of those together earlier, and a lot of them are really specific to what applicants are seeking to propose. And we cannot get into detail on that, as those of you who have stayed with me this entire almost 15 minutes. The purpose of this really is to provide information on the application process, which again can be daunting, but really not what you specifically should be applying for. By the end of this, I hope you know whether or not you are, one, eligible to apply, and if so, you have a better understanding of the process. But as I mentioned, I really do want to pull you to the best practices in the field that I've referenced earlier through those resources. The OJJDP Model Programs Guide, which contains information about evidence-based juvenile justice, youth prevention, intervention, reentry, the OJP crimesolutions.gov, and then the What Works Clearinghouse. If you are a school-based violence prevention program or looking to implement a school-based violence prevention program as it relates to this solicitation, I strongly recommend that you look at what works, what doesn't, and evidence to help make you make evidence-based decisions through the What Works Clearinghouse that was noted earlier in the presentation as well as in the solicitation.
All right. Cindy, reducing violence among juveniles appears to be a major focus of this particular funding opportunity. Will applicants who focus on providing services to children exposed to violence in their homes, schools, or communities without a specific focus on juvenile offenders still be considered?
I would say, without specifically dictating what to put in your application, look closely at the goals and objectives. Funding under this program can be used to develop support services for children exposed to violence and to develop, enhance, and implement violent crime reduction strategies that focus on violent juvenile offenders. So again, this program, the development and resource allocation decisions should be based on your currently available resources to the jurisdiction and the gaps in services across those three goals and the objectives that were listed prior.
All right.
And actually, I see a quick one I can answer. Is there a minimum number of youth that must be served on a yearly basis? No. Tell us what you're doing, the youth that you're serving, and you know, again, what your needs are. There is no minimum that we are mandating.
Okay. Cindy, can you remind us who specifically is eligible for this funding?
Sure, of course. Entities are states and territories, units of local governments, federally recognized Indian tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations, including tribal nonprofit and for-profit organizations and institutions of higher education, including tribal institutions of higher education. So thank you for asking, because it's pretty broad and encompassing, so about everyone. For-profit organizations, as well as other recipients, must forego any profit or management fee. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. So you cannot be getting a fee for work that you're using federal funding for. You can do it in the other side of your work, but anything that's being federally funded cannot include cannot include a profit or management fee. And other OJJ, if you have an OJJDP grant in the past, you are still welcome to apply. I received that question a couple times in the pre-questions. If it's been funded before, does that preclude us from applying again? No. It does not preclude you from applying again.
Are there examples of previously funded projects under this award?
Not this award specifically. Last year we did fund, so our Children's Exposure to Violence funding, we had it was titled Comprehensive School-Based Approaches to Youth Violence and Victimization, Intervention, and Accountability. So this was a school-based focus last year. And the purpose of that funding was to support comprehensive efforts to address youth violence and victimization. This is through prevention, intervention, and accountability, but in a school-based setting. Now, that may be of interest for applicants to go into our homepage, so OJJDP.gov, and go to our funding tab. And under funding, you can look at previous funding. And that will take you to everything that we funded last year, and it really might give you a good sense of what we're looking for. And I'll say that name again. And William, I don't know if, as I'm saying, if you want to type it in, or one of our team members could type it into the chat, it would be the OJJDP FY19 Comprehensive School-Based Approach to Youth Violence and Victimization. Oh gosh, it's a long one. You know what, I'll do it. Comprehensive School-Based Approaches to Youth Violence and Victimization, Prevention, Intervention, and Accountability. So we funded 1 TTA provider and 9 program sites across the country last year under this award. And it, again, was school-based focus, but it may serve as of interest for you to take a look at what we funded with Children's Exposure to Violence funding last year. And I'll type that in while you are queuing up the next question.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, we'll get that in there for the chat for folks to click on there. So as a follow-up for that particular question, Cindy, will OJJDP offer this solicitation in fiscal year 2021?
I hope so. I don't know. We certainly never know what the next year is going to bring. So if you are interested in keeping track of that type of information, you can go to our OJP's Funding Resource Center. So that identifies plans for FY21 when they become available. It's interesting to track, and that's not just our funding. It's across OJP to see what will be coming down the pike. We just don't know what the FY21 budget will look like at this time.
Okay, thank you. Is the funding $1 million per year for 3 years, or $1 million total over the 3 years?
And again, another question comes up, because it does get a little bit confusing as people are looking at the solicitation. And as I talked in quite a bit of detail about the budget, it is $1 million. We're making up to 7 awards at $1 million each. And when you submit your budgets, your total amount across those 3 years, across those 36 months, should not be more than $1 million unless you are doing in-kind. The award might go, but the federal request should never go over $1 million. And that should be across those 3 years.
Okay. Is there a match requirement for this funding?
Nope, there is no match. If you would like to propose one, that's fabulous. But there's no requirement for a match, and if we do approve the budget with the match included, just remember that will become part of your mandatory budget and also subject to audit. So do be thoughtful about any match that you're proposing and including that in your budget, because it will become part of the program expectation.
Is a multidisciplinary team a requirement?
Per the application, and I went through this a bit in detail, but you must propose and undertake your work through a multidisciplinary team. I did see a couple questions. We understand many people are quarantined, so no, you do not need to get those signatures of an MOU right now, but do indicate as a separate attachment labeled planning team who is going to be on your team, who is going to help implement the work that you are proposing, who are your stakeholders. And this team should plan to meet regularly throughout the project period once we can convene again to identify and address service gaps and barriers. This team should be responsible for creating a blueprint for a comprehensive network of services for children exposed to violence and their families. And this team is also going to be responsible to build the capacity of communities to help children exposed to violence and prevent or reduce juvenile violent crime. It's why we really do ask you to be thoughtful about who your stakeholder partners are, and they need to be there ready to do the work that needs to be done.
Cindy, how will I be notified if my agency is selected to receive an award?
If you are selected, you'll receive an award notification by September 30th, 2020. The point of contact and the authorizing official in the application will receive that notification. And then conversely, if you are not selected, and I've said it several times, and please know, I know that there's so much amazing work that's going on out there. This is going to be so competitive. The close to 300 that stuck with us today, we're awarding 7 awards. So if you are not selected, you'll receive notification by October 30th, 2020. And William, I know I see my my stage light is telling me we are coming down to the last 2 minutes.
Yes.
I'm going to turn it back to you. I know you have some closing remarks. I didn't answer all of the questions, and I'm sorry. I hope I did address a bulk of them, but the response center is here for you. That number is still up on the screen. Write that number down. They will help you address the questions that I could not. And I thank you so much. Please be safe, be healthy, and take good care.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. And I do want to echo that for our audience members, we do appreciate you all during these times now to definitely taking your time out to join us. Again, please note that the response center information is located on the slides here. And again, those slides are available in the handout there. And so you're able to submit your questions post-webinar to the response center at this information here. And just another reminder to the audience, as I mentioned earlier, we will have this webinar available for everyone to view a little sooner than possible, just because of some of the audio issues that people may have had with connectivity due to high usage of webinars at this time. But other than that, again, I want to thank Cindy so much for a wonderful presentation. I do just have a few brief announcements for you all to keep in mind before we adjourn. So if you are looking to stay in touch with INTACT, please follow us on Facebook at OJJDP TTA, and also feel free to join us for our listserv so you get more access to information about webinars like these. Please note that we do have a way that you can get in contact with OJJDP by contacting the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. The contact information is included on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, please request assistance via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform. That platform is located at the URL here on this slide. Again, as I stated several times, the webinars are located on our INTACT YouTube page. We will have this webinar up sooner versus than later. So you may reach out to, it will review this in the past. We'll also have, again, the response center information where you can submit your questions that weren't answered today, or your questions that you have in the future to the response center. All that will be located as well on the video that we'll post on YouTube. Just a reminder for our upcoming events, we do have a webinar coming up on April 13th for comprehensive anti-gang programs. This is the next solicitation webinar that we have in regards to anti-gang programs. You can click on the link here to learn more about it, or you can click on that other link to register if you'd like to register for that webinar now. We also have some non-solicitation webinars that are coming up, understanding and combating cyberbullying and digital online hate, coming up on April 27th. Also, we have another webinar coming up with our colleagues at CFF on May 19th. You can click there to learn more, or you can even click the Register Now button to register for that solicitation. Finally, before the rest of you all leave, we do have one final poll question here. Just let us know, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar to your work? You can select the box located right next to your option there, and please note that you can select multiple answers here. So if you have multiple answers that you'd like to indicate, you may do so here. Just take your mouse and click on the answer that you'd like to provide. Again, I'll leave this up just for a little bit for folks to answer, but again, I do want to thank you all again for taking time to join us for our webinar today. Everyone have a great afternoon. Please stay safe and please stay healthy. Take care.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end.